Good morning, everyone. I'm Derek from Lutron, Singapore. I would like to thank all of you for taking time to attend today's sessions, and also the organizer SIDS for giving us the opportunity to share on how Lutron can enhance the lighting experience in the space. Just to share some background of Lutron, we are a 61-year-old US company that provides total light management solutions to our clients. What is total light management solutions? It's to control the natural daylight into the space by using our motorized shades solutions and to create ambience by controlling the artificial lights with our dimming system. We strongly believe to deliver 4 main values to our customers. That is quality, performance, reliability, and service. I believe today's sessions conducted by our guest speaker, Mr. Gaurav, will be the most informative, and you will be a believer that light is transformative too. So I would like to invite Mr. Gaurav to take over from here. Mr. Gaurav.
Thank you very much. Hello, good morning, everyone. And I would like to thank Lutron for giving me this opportunity and SIDFest for organizing this festival. We are in troubling times, but it's great to keep this communication going, this dialogue between us as professionals and people who are interested in the design of lighting, the way it can be designed and manipulated in terms of shaping our interior space. I'm going to be talking to you about that. So today's topic is manipulating light in interior spaces. And I'm hoping to have a dialogue in this. So let me just share. Thank you. Okay. So we have this sorted. All right. So I'm going to start off by talking about the transformative power of light. And I want to start off with a very personalized experience that I believe each one of us would have when it comes to light and how it impacts us. So I'm going to start off by sharing my own experience. And I'd like each one of you to think about this. When you are, perhaps a child or even later on in life, what is the most memorable experience that you had with light? And when I was thinking about this talk, I wanted to share this because it helps us realize, something very fundamental that shapes our imagination and shapes the way we deal with designing of lighting. It has helped to a great measure of me becoming a lighting designer. I have trained as an architect, and then I decided to explore the world of lighting design. And experiences like these help us think and push the envelope of what more we can do with light and how it impacts our imagination. So I'll start off with this story. When I was a student of architecture, and I think I was about 21, So students in my class, all of us, we were on a study trip to the Andaman Islands, which is, I'm from India, so it's way off the coast of India. It takes 2 days to travel to these islands by ship, and that's what we did. So we traveled from Kolkata to the Andaman Islands, and we were there for about 5 days, you know, exploring different parts of the island, taking pictures, looking at the historical architecture, and doing some documentation, uh, some measurements, what was the scale of the important buildings in that area, public space, etc., etc. And one of the evenings, we went to this beautiful beach, and we came back to our dormitories where all students were being housed. And I had this idea, because this beach was so beautiful, I wanted to go back to this beach, and I wanted to witness the sunrise the next morning. So I went to this beach, and I rode a motorbike. And when I reached there, it was past dinner time. We all had a dinner, a couple of beers, and I was all alone, and I parked my motorbike. The beach faces east, so I positioned myself to a vantage point, and I was waiting for these few hours of of the sunrise to happen. So after a while, after about an hour or two, you could hear the ocean, you could hear the waves. Rain started coming, and thunder and lightning, and then finally the lights on this beach went off. And it was that moment I realized I was all alone. I was totally alone standing there. And it was a bit of a scary experience when you're all alone in a place, the lights go off, and you have this sound of the waves, and you have rain, and you have thunder. It makes you wonder whether you want to stay there or you want to go back. So something inside me told me to stay there. And I waited and waited. So in this pitch darkness, your eyes, there is a certain adaptation level in your eyes. They can't see much, you know, and hardly, it was like an inky blackness in front of me. I couldn't see the beach. I couldn't see the ocean in front of me. And it took me a long time to adapt my eyes to this environment. And after a while, I could make out small shapes. I could see the crabs coming out of the beach, of the sand. I took shelter under a coconut tree, not much shelter when it's raining, but I did that. And after a long wait, what seemed like an eternity, something in front of me started moving, a small white silvery kind of object. And I didn't know what it was. And I waited for it to get bigger, and it started advancing towards me. So I got this impression that this is a moving object, and I started walking close towards it. After a while, it became clear to me this was a patch of moonlight falling on the ocean, but I couldn't see the moon. The sky was totally dark. It was cloudy. And it kept getting bigger and bigger, and it became more and more beautiful. And my eyes were wide open. I was totally rooted to the spot. And I felt this was the most amazing experience that I was witnessing at that point. I didn't know how long I waited. It must have been really long for this moon to rise, and then you could see a bit of illumination coming from the clouds. But it really shaped and gave me, you know, this feeling, this really strong feeling of this transformative power of light. And you know what? When I waited for sunrise, I kept waiting. And when sunrise finally happened, it didn't turn out to be as spectacular as I wanted it to be. But that was not the point. What I had witnessed was something far more powerful that has stayed with me ever since. So each one of us, I believe, goes through these strong emotions. And each one of us, like I have done to you, has a story to tell regarding this power of light. Whether it is the beauty of candles, a candlelight dinner with your loved ones, or whether a natural phenomena like you witnessed. And it's one big idea that I'm going to be talking about today that really shapes this imagination. So how do we bring this light? How do we design this light into our interior spaces? Let's talk about some examples from architecture which have done this successfully. So you're looking at this building with a big oculus in the center that allows light to come in and totally shapes the space. You're looking at light really being the defining force of the design of the building. Light comes in through this giant oculus. And as the sun moves during the course of the day, the light also moves. This being a church, a homage to God, it was designed so that during the morning and the evening hours, it could illuminate parts of the surface of the building. And at noon, it would shine straight down and it will illuminate the emperor, who would be the representative of God. A very, very powerful statement with light that helps people relate to the purpose of the building. So what people actually end up doing now is they go in, they have a look, but they don't really wait long enough to see the moving light. This is a classic example of the light moving and the observer being stationary. That is the way it should be experienced. It's also, I would say, a precursor to how stage lighting has been defined, where light is constantly illuminating one object at a time, one deity or one god at a time. Another example of how light can shape a building, where it can go to the extent of being highly metaphorical, and it can define the graphic or the architectural skin of a building. Again, an example of natural light. And you see in both these examples, we are not talking about how beautifully the people are lit. We're just talking about one strong idea that helps light shape the space. When people are here, they're all looking in one direction. They're all looking at this gigantic cross and the light that comes from behind it. They're all looking at the beauty of contrast, where they're looking towards a space with very high contrast, and slowly as they are sitting in a space, they can see light filling it up. I would go to the extent of saying light here is a material on top of another material, which is concrete. So when we design with light, if we consider light as only a measure of brightness, that we need to make a space this bright, we need to make it brighter for more visual comfort, we can't proceed much in really helping it shape the determining character. We need to think beyond light as only a measure of brightness. We need to think about light as something that can evoke a very strong positive emotion. In this example, we've taken light to an extreme level. We've taken light to a level where it can cause extreme agony, anxiety, hope. People cry when they're in the space. It goes back to history, it goes back to a lot of emotions that have shaped culture, location, generations. In addition to light, other factors in the design of this interior space, like compression, scale, materiality, all work together in creating that perfect ambience to get the emotion the designer wants. So here, we're talking about light as a deep emotion. From the first slide which I showed you, where light is used like a sundial, like a moving spotlight, we've come to a point where it can be something really, really intense. Again, all three examples have a common theme. It's one central idea. We are talking about one big idea. And this really helps in working with light. I'll come to something that is more contemporary. So I was working for Lighting Planners Associates, a renowned lighting design firm. And I worked on this project. It was the Gardens by the Bay in Singapore. And this building has not been designed with light as the central theme. It has a beautiful garden space. And when you are here in this dome, the only thing that you see and you're meant to see is this waterfall of light. You can see the contrast in the space. There's one central idea that the waterfall must be the most visible object. And the color is also very critical. It's not white, it's not blue, it's not pink. It has this kind of an ethereal quality to it. It's somewhere between blue, somewhere between pink, a little bit of violet, you know, all those colors, and as the water moves, you see that constantly shifting. During the day, this dome is full of light, but in the night, the focus shifts to only this element. Together with sound and this twilight glow, the whole space can be very enchanting. So we're not talking about lux levels. We're not talking about how bright and how safe it is for people. What I want to talk here is the human body is extremely resilient. Just like our body can take varying levels of temperature, our bodies can also, our eyes can also easily adapt to varying levels of light. And here's something that is a pure interior space where we are talking about light having this effect on changing the perception of material. The travertine stone that you see here shaping the material of the lobby is illuminated with light that is deep recessed and creating this glow of a lantern inside the space. You don't see the lights as much, as you see the effect of the light. So now we have a lot of LEDs in the market, and everybody uses LEDs. And because they consume very little energy, we have lots of LEDs in our designs. But I think the basic premise of the lighting effect does not change. It doesn't matter what the light source is. What appeals to us visually, what appeals to our perception doesn't change. I shared with you my experience of moonlight striking water. I don't think if light sources change over the next 20 years, that sense of beauty will ever change. It'll still be the same. This is actually an idea that has been done before in the 60s, in the 70s. You will see projects where deep recessed lights illuminate surfaces or vertical illumination of surfaces. It's not a new idea. It's just that it's been done in such a way using the latest technology, you don't see the sources. Another thing which I want to point out in this is the materiality, the contrast of surfaces. You have a very dark floor, and that adds to the quality of the space. So when we work with light, we are not talking only about what light fittings we are using, how much brightness or contrast we want to achieve. We are also talking about base, interior, and architecture materials. Can you imagine the space if it was having a white matte floor? It wouldn't be the same. It's because of the materials that are chosen for this that enhance the beauty and the perception of the space. So I'm going to be talking about 5 properties of light. You can consider them as takeaways from the talk. And most lighting designers work with 4 or 5 properties, largely revolving around this. But it's also good for interior designers, architects, to be thinking about them when you're shaping your buildings. So let's talk about the first one, brightness. So the first premise of light in any kind of space is when we make our buildings is how bright do we want it to be? Usually we have codes, we have guidelines saying that we need to be making this at 100 lux. Lux is the measurement of light, or 500 lux or 300 lux. But I think we need to think beyond that. It's not just about making a space bright. It's also making it comfortable. It's also making it aligned to the interior design. In this particular example, there are strips of ceiling surface, very dark, that are part of the design. And the light follows the linearity of the ceiling surface and creates a wash on the material. Maybe you're not able to see that very clearly in the slide, but maybe towards the right side of the slide, you can see the reflection on the ceiling material and casts an even glow over the space. But we don't want the whole room to be looking uniform. So we try to achieve the variation with a darker flow. We try to achieve contrast. There is also the view to the outside, and no lighting scheme is complete without harnessing the power of natural light. So we need to talk about brightness, just not from artificial light sources, but also from natural light. But natural light can also cause glare. So there are multiple things that are happening here. You need a certain level of light to fulfill the task. We need to have view to the outside. We need to make the space interesting, so we need to have variation in materials. And we need to cut down glare, for which it's important to have a certain kind of screen protection from glare. So there are these 4 or 5 things that are happening at the same time to control the brightness, to design the brightness of the space. I mentioned contrast a few times. So I'm going to be talking about contrast here. Contrast is a very interesting thing, a very important tool in the toolkit of a lighting designer, also interior design. I joke with this. I often say that contrast is like a secret sauce that you add to your dish, because it gives a lot of flavor. And just like sauce, you can't have too much of it. You need to control how much contrast we put into a space. But contrast can create drama, can make a space look really theatrical. Over here, you see just 2 basic things in the space. You see a certain rhythm of light that frames and then frames and then frames again. So you're moving between light to shadow to light to shadow and light. And you see guiding light that takes you from one level to another on a staircase. That's all. Now, typically, one would add more light, to fill up the space, to enhance the level difference between the two. But it's not needed. It's a highly dramatic space. And the columns are octagonal. So when you have only one light source illuminating part of a column, our eyes automatically help complete the picture of the remaining part of the columns. So our eyes, our brain do not need to have a lot of light to help us in perception. There's a lot of blanks that we can fill by very little light. I want to talk about color. I like this project very much. It was done in Spain by a very cleverly thought design scheme. So we're seeing 2-3 things happening here. Color is a very important part of design. We talked about color in the previous slides. I talked about twilight. I talked about sunrise. So color really helps us enjoy our world. And we should be aware of the power that color can help. In this case, it's going as far as branding the design scheme. So for a corporate client, for a gas station client, the designer illuminated the canopy with red, which is their corporate color. And for functional lighting, when somebody comes to the gas station, the illumination of that functional area is done with white light. They're 2 completely separate things. You usually don't see these examples. You would either see the whole space filled with color, or you would see the whole space with white light. So I think this is a very clever solution of harnessing the power of color and yet not compromising on the functional aspects that one would need when accessing the space. Color doesn't have to be just red, green, blue, and these saturated colors. Colors can also be pastel colors. And nowadays, we are talking about color in a kind of a biological clock, where the color of light that is most comfortable to us in the mornings is warm and gets to a white or blue during the day. And then in the evenings, again comes down to a warm to help us relax in the evenings, and quite the opposite of it, having a very whitish or bluish light in the mornings to make us very active. The 4th property that I will talk about is distribution. Light can come into a space in many different ways. It can come from the sky, the ceiling. It can come from the walls. It can be a small spot, or it can be a very wide diffuse light, in this case, an artificial sky. It can create a very soft level of light through the ambient light, which is the skylight here. Or it can create just the necessary amount of light on the object that we want to illuminate it through a focus spot. So whether it is a narrow spread of light or whether it's a very wide spread of light, the distribution of light is very critical. So when we design a space, we often ask ourselves, how is the light distributed? Where is it coming from? How big is it? How small is it? Do we step into it? Do we step out of it? Natural light is also a big contributor in this aspect. We try to make our spaces more accessible to natural light, get more views. And I think in today's context, especially looking at a COVID and a post-COVID world, we need to be more in harmony with nature. So that really helps us in that aspect. And I want to talk about control. So I often say that lighting without control is like a music system without volume control. We don't listen to music without adjusting the volume. You know, you want to listen to classical, you like to listen at particular volume at a particular time of the day. And we like to listen to something which is more intense. You want to listen to rock, you want to play it up loud. So why don't we do that often with light? It's very funny. We're in this auditorium space, and those of you who are in the Zoom, I'd like to share with you also. You can't see this, but I was trying to adjust the lighting here when we were setting this up, and the lights here don't dim. They switch off. There are different circuits, but you can't dim the lights. So it's limiting. You can't have the light you exactly want when you're making the presentation. So it's important to have dimming. But more often than not, the trend is to save costs. And many projects miss out on this critical aspect. Dimming helps us create different moods for different situations. And by helping with this variation of mood, different atmosphere, we also save energy. There is an energy saving component as well, which is quite significant. Much before smartphones became smart, lighting was already smart. So in the last 30, 40 years, we've had lighting control, the ability to control light as a smart way of designing lighting. But I think I wouldn't have the numbers, but maybe Lutron could provide later to you, that I wouldn't be surprised if more than 20% projects actually have lighting control. The number may be much lesser than that. So this brings me to my last slide, which is talking about where we started from, the transformative power of light. The one big idea that we can have light create a very strong emotion within us. We don't need to do too much in terms of having too many light fittings, too much brightness. We can keep things very simple. But we need to have that one big idea, that one big emotion, and the ability to change, to be softer, to be louder, to be brighter, to have variation. And I hope each one of you has this this strong emotion with some experience of light that you carry in your hearts. So that's all that I had to say. And I'm open to questions from the audience. And we're open to a kind of a discussion. I'd love to hear from you, your thoughts. Thank you very much. Would anybody like to share their first memorable experience with light? The lighting people would have something.
Is this? Hey, nice meeting you. My name is Vikram. I am working for Crayon Lighting, if you know. My question was, what do you think is the future of lighting in terms of just the lights, not the light sources, but the fitting themselves, like the luminaires. Are they going to change a lot, or what should lighting manufacturers like work on for future? This is the question I ask a lot of lighting designers.
Okay, so let's first understand. Thanks. It's an interesting question. It's actually having a very wide scope, but there's a general trend that we are seeing, and I'd like to answer this by first saying there are two types of lighting. Light luminaires, what we call as architectural and decorative. So when modern architectural lighting started, it started with the intention of creating an incandescent or a halogen light source, which does pure functional lighting. And I guess what you're asking me coming from Crayon is more of architectural lighting. So I think the future of lighting, what we as designers want manufacturers like yourselves to do, is to make light sources that give a lot of flexibility, luminaires that give a lot of flexibility to the designer. The same luminaire can give a tight beam of light. The same luminaire can give a very wide diffuse spread. I think most manufacturers go in the direction of creating too many luminaires, which actually becomes a problem for us designers because we can't keep track with all the manufacturers making these 30, 40 product ranges. I've never really understood why there are so many product ranges. But I think what would be good in the future is to have minimum product ranges and maximum flexibility of optics, of light source types, of control types. So you could have one light that can be configured in perhaps 3,000 or 4,000 ways. And you should keep it simple in terms of the design of the luminaire. There is this talk that should we go for circular light? Should we go for square light fittings? Should we go for linear light fittings? Is linear the future? I think it doesn't matter. A linear light also gives a circular light footprint on the ground. So how does it matter if it's linear or circular? And if it's an architectural luminaire, then I rather not see it. So you should think of making luminaires that have excellent control. We are talking about IoT these days a lot. We are talking about circadian lighting, where we can control the different color temperature, the intensity. We are talking about light fittings packed with a lot of the extra stuff like sensors, giving data input, output, all that stuff. I think the intelligence must be much more, the design must be much more simple. That's what I would look at. Thanks, that was a good question.
Hello. Hi,
Hi.
I'm Jackie. I'm from Trilogy Integration.
Hi, Jack.
We are the Lutron dealer. So I want to know that does lighting designers actually look into dimming from 1 to 10%?
Sorry, lighting
How
designers?
often do lighting designers look at dimming level from 1 to 10%? Like, is it a norm or?
I do it all the time.
Okay.
And
So-
I do something much more than this.
I see.
So I'm working on a project where I've asked the contractors, the automation people, the lighting control people, to dim the lights from late afternoon to evening across a 2-hour fade time, so that the client, the user, doesn't even know when the artificial lights switch on. And that can't happen if you just start from 10% to 100%. So they start at 4 o'clock and start from 1%, gradually go up to 10. And then from 5:30, start picking up space, and go much faster. So 6:30 becomes dark, so we are about 70, 75%. And that's a very natural way of looking at lighting, how it should just dovetail into that transition from day to night. You don't want a rapid switch. No, it's just like daylight. The sun is, shifting through clouds. Some part of the light falling on the ground is brighter. Some part of the light is a little dimmer. And if you can recreate that same softness and transition in this 0 to 10%, 10 to 40%, 40 to 75%, and if you need higher, then that would feel very natural. Of course, there should always be the possibility that if you need to do an override, that you need to have brighter light now, you should be able to override the system. But as much of it is automated, as much of it is not requiring human intervention and comes through a time clock, that would be great. And if all light fittings factor this into account, that will give our customers, will give our clients the possibility of this slow start, that'd be wonderful.
One more question. So aside from the reliability of the product, what else do you want to see from a lighting control system? I mean, because there's a lot of other brands aside from Lutron. Because I'm from a sales background, so a lot of times is I want to ask the right questions. So coming from a lighting designer, what are they looking into other than reliability? Because we know that Lutron provide very good reliability in terms of warranty and all, but other than this, are there any factors that you are looking into as well?
Well, there are a few. Since we are specifically talking about controls, and we talked about 0 to 10%. So having light that doesn't flicker is very important. And this flicker can be visual, or it can have a non-visual effect on us. So better than most people that you can test flicker, and it would be very good to tell designers that controlling light, the light source itself, as well as the automation system, does not cause any flicker. It's very, very smooth. It's very logarithmic. It's very gradual. That's very important. And when it comes to the light fitting itself, I always try to emphasize a very natural quality of light. So a very good color rendering, We are talking a lot about tunable white these days. Now, tunable white is a little tricky because in spaces that you have daylight, tunable light makes a lot of sense. That you have, I worked on the Jewel. So this is a project that has tunable white, in a lot of these spaces that are receiving natural light from the skylight. And when you're inside a retail area, then of course you are subject to whatever lighting environment is there of the retail. Louis Vuitton would have their kind of retail lighting. Swarovski would have something else. But when you're in a common space under natural light, supplemented by artificial light, they must speak the same language. So the color temperature matches. So tunable white is also very important. Flicker is important. Color rendering is important. You want to feel as natural as possible. LED gives us this possibility that we can harness the quality of the LED to give us light that is as natural as possible. And as I mentioned, now the trend is to build a lot of intelligence into the light. Now, honestly speaking, I don't know if that's really a good thing because there are a whole bunch of issues that go with it, data collection, privacy, all that. But I think lighting is becoming much more than just something that creates this visual comfort. So these are the things that I would look for in a specification to put into a project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have some questions.
I got one question, probably you have answered partial of it. I will go ahead and ask. You mentioned about light transformations, right? So how do we experience transformation when we usually do not stay in the space long enough to experience that? Is it through design or through control?
You're talking about
The experience.
explaining in a project or a personalized experience.
Personalized experience as in the projects, right?
Okay. Yes, I think one has to stay in the space firstly long enough. So I've been to the Pantheon a few times, and every time I go, so the first was like for me, I went there and I saw this giant circular beam of light coming down, and I was totally transfixed by it. But as I've gone there more than 3 or 4 times, I observe the people who go and experience this. Most people, most of them, they come, they see this light, they quickly take some pictures, and they go out to that ice cream shop which is outside. They just take a break and they move on to the next destination. That's not how you can experience light. That's just taking a picture for Instagram. These kind of experiences, I must have spent something like 7 hours on that beach to fully comprehend what was going on. And I was alone. I've also felt that to have a really transformational experience, you need to be by yourself. It's difficult to be with a lot of people talking, chit-chatting. Is it nice? Or you can't get it. You have to be alone. So that's very important. To be with yourself, with your own thoughts, to really do a deep dive into this. And then things open up automatically. It was so powerful for me that even more than 20 years later, I think about it often. So I think it really requires a deep dive.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, one more question. I'm sure you worked with Lutron before. So could you share what is the one of the case that you really love about, the best that you have worked with so far with Lutron? The best design, and why?
Okay, I'll talk about dimming in general. Not specific to Lutron, but what I really like about what dimming can provide me. And it's partly reflected in what I've spoken earlier, that the ability to have a full control over the lighting environment. And I'm not talking purely about artificial light. I'm also talking about natural light. So in that project, where you saw the classroom, the study room, and there were blinds coming down, I think that was, incidentally, Lutron worked on that project. But what I really liked over there was at different times of the day, you could bring the blinds down. You could control the view that students could see outside. You cut down the glare. You still gave them a view, but you cut down the glare. And the lights could be calibrated to a level that was very, very comfortable. The best light is when people don't know what's happening on the ceiling. When people just come, effortlessly do their work, enjoy the view, and then once they're done, they walk out. They don't need to fumble for switches. They don't need to switch on, off. Everything is happening automatically. That is the best light. You know, this is a bit of a paradoxical thing because at times we say, and it's becoming very important, that we want to have individual control over our lights. I think this is becoming more important in the post-COVID scenario, that designs will move more to a direction where, for example, an office building, you would like individual people having control over their localized lighting, perhaps having control over a cluster, you know, in a ceiling. But it also means putting extra effort, you know, and at times we tend to forget, you know, we are in a rush, we have to do something, there's a deadline. You're not, oh, I need to have the perfect lighting environment for me to work. We don't do that. But if it happens automatically, there's a light that senses that somebody is working here. It's this time of the day. I need to give him this much light level. I need to change the color temperature to make him feel comfortable. I think that's the real success. And I think Lutron and all other manufacturers, automation as well as lighting manufacturers like yourself, have to move towards this being in the background, but giving you everything that you want.
Thank you.
Can I check if there's any more questions from the ground? If not, maybe I can address some questions from Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah, one more. You mentioned about lights enhancing the space, right? How lighting control contribute to this?
So I started off with that example that if you're listening to music and you don't have volume control, you're always listening to music at the same volume. So it's as fundamental as that. Lighting control is like how a DJ operates music. You know, you're changing, you're increasing the pitch, reducing it. It's very, very important to create that feeling of well-being. I don't think you can achieve a kind of a feeling of well-being and positive emotion in an enclosed space without being able to control this. So from that sense, lighting control is very important. I also feel lighting control cannot be partial. Like you can't have a little bit of lighting control. You either have all of it or you have none. And none is a problem, you know. So we need to have a very detailed, a very elaborate control system to really enjoy the full benefits of the space. I often tell my clients, if you have a budget issue, I'll cut down on the lighting spec, but let's not cut down on the automation. Because what's the point of having a $500 downlight which doesn't dim properly or cannot be dimmed at all because I don't have a control system? I think it's much better to have a $100 downlight, which I can dim down, change the color temperature, tune it, calibrate it. I'll enjoy that experience much more. Doesn't matter if it's not something that is not built to the best of materials, but the quality of light that I get is far more impactful to me as a user because I have automation, because I have control over it.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a speaker, sorry, we have a attendee from Zoom like to chat with you. How to determine the correct distance between light fitting?
How to determine, sorry,
The correct distance between light fitting?
correct distance between the
Mm,
light fitting?
yeah.
It totally depends on the use of the space. And based on these 5 properties that I had shared, if you want the space to be bright, you have more light fittings, or you have light fittings that give more light. If you want to have more contrast in a space, you have very few light fittings, the bare minimum possible. And it will be determined by the design of the space. The materials that the interior designer or the architect are using for the space. So there is no magic formula. You will often come across engineering books that will say that to achieve so much brightness, you need to have a grid of lights in the ceiling that do this. But it is best that this blanket rule, one size shoe fits all approach is avoided. You can't follow a blanket rule because these don't create the kind of an emotional response that we would expect from a space. We need to have a positive emotional response from the space, and light can come from many directions. If it's coming from the side, the rule of distance between light fittings takes a whole new meaning. You can have a space that is partially lit from the side, partially lit from the ceiling. You can have a space that can have indirect lighting. You can have floor standing lamps that are illuminating the ceiling and you get indirect light coming down. So it totally depends on the design approach. What is the impression we want to create? And that will help determine finally what kind of light or light fitting, how much should be the distance, because there is no magic rule.
Okay, thank you. We have another question that's actually quite related to this as well. Are you able to share more about like testing of light sources and material finishes? Would you do small mock-up or prototype to find the right effect based on with the lighting?
Yes, a mock-up is always highly recommended because no matter how much of calculations we do, it is difficult to get a sense of the quality of light unless we see it for ourselves. So I teach also, and I often tell my students not to rely on aids like Photoshop and lighting calculation software to determine what this light can do. Yes, it can serve as a guide in the initial planning, but it doesn't give you ever a correct picture because we are talking about 3-dimensional space here. And we need to stand as observers in the middle of this 3-dimensional space to get the full impact of what the lighting can have. So mock-ups are extremely important. Mock-ups can be as simple as doing scale mock-ups, building models, and testing with the right color temperature, what you want. Or it can be full-scale mock-ups, 1:1, where you build a replica of the space and you try to recreate the exact lighting environment by using a small quantity of lights. So for any project, for any design, I think mock-ups are crucial.
All right, thank you. Okay, one last question before we end this session. How do you configure the light luminaire? What type of light based on the material that you use?
If I understand that correctly,
Yeah.
how does material determine the type of light fitting, is it?
Yes, correct. How do you configure it as well?
Yeah, this is a very important question because ultimately what we see is only reflected light, which is coming from the light bouncing of materials. When we go out under natural light, we never really look up to the sun and walk. We're always looking in front of us. Light is bouncing off the street, the buildings, the trees. It's the same with interior surfaces. Light is bouncing off the walls, the floors, the ceiling, the furniture, whatever objects we have. So materiality is very important to address. If we have highly reflective surfaces, we need to have a different kind of light source that doesn't show up as unwanted reflections all over the place. If we have very matte finish materials, we have a different kind of light source. We can have more flexibility in terms of design. So right from the onset of the design process, it's important to have an understanding of what the material will be. And if the material changes, there is a high likelihood that the choice of light fitting may change to complement the material, to complement the effect of light that we want. I showed a slide of an office building with travertine stone that was illuminated with deep coats to highlight the materiality, to create that shine in that material, because the material was so gorgeous and so beautiful. And the floor was jet black, which act like a black mirror, amplifying the effect of reflection. So, for example, if you have a water body, a shallow water body, which is usually having a black stone because it's a reflective pool, what would you do? Would you put lights inside it, or would you leave it black so that it reflects the surroundings, what it's supposed to do as a reflective pool? I often choose the latter. So material also helps us decide what not to light. So as it's important to find out or work on the process of lighting this, lighting that, we must also know we must not light this, we must not light that. Because this should act as a mirror, this should act as a totally dark surface, this should recede into the background. This material should be lit so that it comes in the foreground. The humans are phototropic, we are drawn to light. Any material that we light, we will find it advancing towards us. If this material is brighter than the adjacent material, but they're on the same plane, we will find one of them is closer to us compared to the next. So using visual cues like this, we can create the space that we want. And material character plays a very strong, very important role in this. I hope I've answered that question successfully.
Okay, I think that sum up all the questions we have from Zoom. So, any last question from the girl? If there's no more, then I guess we will end the session. Right, thank you, everyone.
So I think, Derek, you have something to say? So thank you all very much. I've really enjoyed this, and I hope you have as well. Thanks for the Zoom questions as well. So we are at the end of the session, and I think Lutron would want the audience to actually see some of the products that they have on display. Thank you very much, everyone.